By 9 that morning, my husband had convinced an entire courtroom I was crazy. By 10, his own emails would prove I was the only sane person in our marriage. I remember the way the courthouse smelled that morning, like old paper, burnt coffee, and rain trapped in wool coats. The sky over downtown Chicago was the color of steel, and every step I took across the marble floor sounded too loud, as if the building itself wanted everyone to turn and look at me. And they did. Reporters near the hallway lowered their voices when I passed. A woman from Charles's charity board pressed her lips together with pity. One man I had seen at our Christmas dinner leaned toward his wife and whispered, "That's her. Not Allison Whitmore. Not the woman who painted murals for children's hospitals. Not the wife who had smiled beside Charles for 3 years at galas, ribbon cuttings, and carefully staged magazine photos. Just her. The unstable wife. The problem. The embarrassing headline." I kept walking. My gray dress was simple, bought off a clearance rack for $42.99, and my hands were so cold I could barely feel the small flash drive hidden inside my coat pocket. It was no bigger than my thumb, black plastic scratched near the edge, ordinary enough to be mistaken for nothing. But inside it were the words my husband had never thought I would find. Inside it was the version of the truth he could not charm, erase, or explain away. Charles was already seated when I entered courtroom 4B. Of course he was. Charles Whitmore was never late when there was an audience. He wore a dark navy suit, a silver tie, and the wounded expression of a man carrying a private tragedy with dignity. His attorney sat beside him with 3 neat folders stacked like weapons. Behind him were his mother, Margaret, 2 executives from Whitmore Holdings, and Vanessa Cole, his communications director, sitting straight-backed in cream silk with her eyes fixed on the front wall. Vanessa did not look at me. She never did when there were witnesses. Charles did. He turned slowly, just enough for the room to see the pain he wanted them to believe, and then he gave me that small, sad smile he had practiced so well. The smile that said, "I tried to save her." The smile that had made doctors nod, friends retreat, and my own sister ask me if maybe I needed rest. I sat at the opposite table beside Daniel Reed, the only lawyer who had not asked me to calm down before asking what happened. He was in his early 40s, with tired eyes and a legal pad full of careful handwriting. He did not promise miracles. He did not tell me the truth always wins. The first time we met, he only said, "Allison, I do not need them to like you. I need one thing they cannot deny." My fingers found the flash drive in my pocket. One thing. Across the aisle, Charles leaned toward his attorney and murmured something too soft for anyone else to hear. But I knew his mouth well enough to read the shape of it. "She is unstable. Everyone knows it." For a second my lungs tightened. Not because the words surprised me, because they still had the power to sound familiar. That was how he had done it, not with shouting, not with anything the neighbors could report, not with anything obvious enough to leave a bruise on the world. He had used concern. He had wrapped control in tenderness. He had turned every objection into a symptom, every tear into evidence, every memory of mine into something fragile and suspicious. The judge entered and everyone stood. Chairs scraped. Fabric rustled. Charles lowered his head like a respectful husband. I rose more slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in that room pressing against my back. I wanted to turn around and tell them I was not confused. I was not broken. I was not the story he had sold them over dinner tables and charity luncheons. But I had learned something after 3 years of marriage to a man like Charles Whitmore. The truth does not always survive when you scream it. Sometimes it survives because you write it down, save it twice, and wait for the morning when the whole world is forced to read it. 3 years earlier, before the courthouse, before the whispers, before I learned to hide proof in ordinary places, I believed Charles Whitmore was the safest man I had ever met. I met him at a winter fundraiser for St. Anne's Children's Hospital, where I had been hired to paint a wall of paper stars with the kids in the lobby before the donors arrived. I was 26, wearing a borrowed black dress and trying not to get blue paint on the sleeves. Charles stood out even before I knew his name. Not because of the suit, though it probably cost more than my monthly rent, and not because people stepped aside when he entered, though they did. It was the way he knelt beside a little boy in a wheelchair and asked about the dragon painted on his paper star, as if no one else in that marble lobby mattered. I remember thinking, a man that rich does not have to be kind, so maybe this is real. Later, He found me near the supply table, washing paint from my fingers with a paper towel. "You made this place feel less like a hospital," he said. I laughed because I did not know what to do with praise from a man like him. It was mostly glitter and washable paint. He smiled. "Sometimes that is enough." That was the first version of Charles, the one everyone loved. The generous donor. The careful listener. The man who sent flowers to my small apartment after our first coffee date. Then sent soup when I mentioned I had caught a cold. Then sent a car when it snowed 8 inches and he did not want me walking to the train. First, his attention felt like warmth. After years of stretching paychecks, fixing my own sink with online videos, and pretending not to panic when my card declined at the grocery store, being cared for felt like stepping out of the wind. When he asked me to marry him 6 months later, he did it at a quiet restaurant near Lake Michigan, with candles reflecting in the window and a diamond ring so bright I could barely look at it. He said, "You will never have to worry again." I heard love. I did not yet understand that some promises sound beautiful because they are also cages. The Whitmore house sat on 2 acres outside Lake Forest, with white columns, iron gates, and windows tall enough to make me feel small before I even walked inside. Charles called it our home, but nothing in it belonged to me. The furniture had been chosen by decorators. The paintings were investments. Even the flowers seemed to know where to stand. Still I tried. I hung one of my own sketches in the breakfast room, a soft charcoal drawing of a woman standing in morning light. The next day it was gone. Charles kissed my forehead and said, "It did not match the room, sweetheart. I had it moved to your little studio." Your little studio. He said it gently, but something in me folded. Then came the schedule changes. A lunch with my sister disappeared from the calendar. He said I must have forgotten to confirm it. My old art students sent messages I never received. He said my phone had been acting strange. I left my keys in the blue bowl by the door, and the next morning they were in the laundry room. He laughed softly and said, "Allison, you have been so scattered lately." Each mistake was tiny. Each explanation was reasonable. And each time I questioned him, his face filled with patient concern, as if my doubt hurt him more than his control hurt me. The first time he told someone he was worried about my mental state, we were at brunch with Margaret. I had corrected him about a date, something small, nothing that should have mattered. Charles reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "She has been under a lot of stress," he told his mother. "Sometimes she remembers things differently." Margaret looked at me with soft alarm, and I felt the room tilt, not because I was confused, but because I understood how easily he had done it. One sentence. One tender voice. One public performance of concern. That was all it took to make my truth look unstable. By the 2nd year of our marriage, I had started painting in the room Charles called my little studio because it was the only place in that house where I could still hear my own thoughts. It was a narrow sunroom at the back of the property, looking out over the frozen garden and the tall hedges that separated the Whitmore estate from the road. The decorators had filled the rest of the house with polished wood, white roses and silence, but in that room, I kept chipped mugs full of brushes, old drop cloths, tubes of paint, and a laptop I had owned since before Charles. The laptop was slow, dented on one corner, and missing the letter A on the keyboard, but it held my sketches, old lesson plans, and photographs from the life I used to have. Charles never cared about it. That was why it survived. Around that time, I began working on a painting I never showed anyone. It was not pretty. It was not the kind of art people bought at charity auctions while sipping champagne. It showed a woman standing behind a cracked pane of glass, one hand lifted, mouth slightly open, as if she was speaking to people who could see her but could not hear her. I did not know why I kept returning to it night after night. Maybe because the cracks looked like proof. Maybe because the woman still had light on her face. I would paint until after midnight, then wash my brushes quietly in the little sink while the rest of the house slept. One Thursday evening in March, Charles came home early from a board dinner, irritated in that calm way that meant everyone around him needed to move carefully. He stepped into the studio without knocking, glanced at the painting, then at me. "Still working on this one?" he asked. "Yes. It feels a little intense." His voice was mild, but his eyes were not. People might misunderstand it. I wiped blue paint from my thumb. "It is not for people." He smiled. "Everything is for people when you are my wife." Then his phone rang, and he set his open laptop bag on my chair while he took the call. He paced near the windows, speaking in that clipped executive tone I had heard on earnings calls and television interviews. Something about a hearing. Something about optics. Something about making sure the narrative stayed clean. When he left, he took the bag, but not before using my old laptop for 5 minutes because his battery had died. I barely noticed. That was the frightening thing about important moments. They often enter quietly, disguised as nothing. Later that night, after Charles had gone upstairs, I opened my laptop to upload a photograph of the cracked glass painting. The browser was still open. At first I thought it was my email, but the inbox was not mine. It was Charles's company account, still signed in, the Whitmore Holdings logo sitting in the upper left corner like a seal on a locked door. My first instinct was to close it. A good wife would close it. A reasonable woman would respect privacy. But then I saw the subject line. Make her look unstable before the hearing. My hand went cold on the trackpad. For several seconds I did not move. I stared at those 7 words until they stopped looking like words and became a hallway opening under my feet. The sender was Vanessa Cole. The recipient was Charles. There were replies beneath it. A chain of messages marked urgent, confidential, follow up. My heart beat so loudly I thought I might wake the whole house. I clicked once. Not because I was brave. Because some part of me needed to know whether the woman behind the cracked glass had been imagining the wall. The first email was short. Vanessa had written that the charity board was prepared to support Charles if Allison became difficult in court. Charles replied, "Good. If she sounds emotional, people will believe the pattern." I covered my mouth but no sound came out. Another message mentioned Dr. Harlan, Charles's private physician, and a draft letter describing my stress, confusion, and erratic memory. Another referred to moving funds before I retained counsel. I did not read everything. I could not. My eyes blurred and the room seemed too bright, too quiet, too still. But I remembered the advice my father once gave me when I was a teenager, and someone tried to blame me for something I had not done. Do not argue with a liar while your hands are empty. Bring receipts. So I brought receipts. One screenshot. Then another. Then I saved the email chain as a file, copied it onto a flash drive I found in a drawer, and named the folder Blue Paint, because Charles would never open anything that sounded like my art. Before I logged out, I looked back at the painting on the easel. The woman behind the glass no longer looked helpless to me. She looked like she had just found the first crack wide enough to breathe through. The next morning, I woke before sunrise with the flash drive hidden inside an old paint box beneath tubes of cobalt blue and burnt umber. Charles was already downstairs, sitting at the breakfast table with a cup of black coffee and the Wall Street Journal folded beside his plate. He looked rested. That was what frightened me most. A man could plan the dismantling of his wife's life and still sleep well under Egyptian cotton sheets. I walked in wearing jeans and a cream sweater, trying to make my face ordinary, trying to breathe like a woman who had not spent half the night reading proof that her marriage had become a performance staged against her. Charles looked up and smiled. "You were in the studio late." I reached for the coffee pot. I could not sleep. "I know." He said it softly like concern, but his eyes followed my hands. "You have been restless lately." I poured too much cream into my cup and watched the color change from black to pale brown. "Maybe I have had reasons." His smile did not move, but something behind it sharpened. "Allison, this is exactly what I mean." There it was again. The gentle trap. A sentence with no raised voice, no obvious cruelty, just enough pressure to make me feel as if I had stepped onto thin ice. Before I could answer, Margaret arrived through the side entrance with her driver carrying 2 garment bags for the Whitmore Foundation dinner that evening. She kissed Charles on the cheek first, then came to me with a careful hug that stopped short of warmth. "You look tired, dear," she said. Charles lowered his newspaper. She had another difficult night. Another. As if there had been a whole record of them. As if he had been counting my breathing for evidence. I looked at him, then at Margaret, and for one wild second, I wanted to put the flash drive on the table between the silverware and the orange juice. I wanted to say, ask him about Vanessa, ask him about Dr. Harlan, ask him why his company email contains a strategy for making me look unstable. But Daniel Reed did not exist in my life yet. I had no lawyer. No verified copies. No one prepared to stand beside me when Charles turned the room against me. So I swallowed the truth and let it burn quietly. That evening, the foundation dinner was held in a glass-walled ballroom at a private club overlooking Lake Michigan. Snow flurries moved outside like white ash, while inside, donors lifted champagne glasses under chandeliers and congratulated Charles for his generosity. His photograph stood near the entrance, printed on a 6-foot banner. Charles Whitmore, building hope through compassion. I almost laughed when I saw it. Compassion. The word looked expensive in gold lettering. Charles kept one hand at the small of my back as he guided me from group to group, the perfect husband, the perfect host. He introduced me as my talented Allison, but every compliment came with a leash. She has been painting again when she has the energy. She is sensitive, but that is what makes her art special. We are taking things one day at a time. People nodded with sympathy before I had said a word. Vanessa stood near the bar in an ivory dress, speaking to a reporter from a Chicago lifestyle magazine. When she saw me, her smile flickered, then returned brighter than before. "Allison," she said, touching my arm as if we were friends. "You look lovely. Are you feeling better?" Better from what? The question landed in the air between us, sweet and poisonous. 2 board members turned toward me. Margaret paused mid-sip. Charles's hand pressed lightly against my back, a warning disguised as support. I said, "I was not aware I was unwell." Vanessa's eyes widened with practiced concern. Charles sighed just softly enough for everyone to hear. "Sweetheart." 1 word. That was all he needed. The circle went quiet. My cheeks warmed, but I kept my voice steady. "Do not call me that when you are trying to correct me in public." A donor looked down at his drink. Margaret whispered my name. Charles turned me gently away from the group, still smiling for the room. "You are overwhelmed," he said. "Let us get some air." Near the hallway, out of the crowd but not out of sight, I pulled my arm free. I saw the emails. For the first time all night his face changed. Only for a second. A tiny pause. A blink too slow. Then he leaned closer and said in a voice no one else could hear, "The more you fight, Allison, the more you prove my point." Behind him, through the ballroom doors, I saw Vanessa watching us with her phone in her hand. And I understood then that tonight was not a dinner. It was a rehearsal. Charles was not waiting for court to begin. He had already put me on trial. The morning after the foundation dinner, Charles filed for divorce before I even finished my coffee. I found out from a courier who arrived at the front gate with a manila envelope and a face so neutral he might have been delivering a catalog. The papers were thick, clipped together with a silver binder, and my name looked strange printed beside his, as if the marriage had already become a business dispute. Petition for dissolution. Emergency financial restrictions. Temporary control of marital assets. Concern regarding respondent's emotional stability. Respondent. That was me now. Not wife. Not partner. Not even Allison in the language of the court. Just a person to be managed, limited, explained. I stood in the foyer with the envelope open in my hands while Charles came down the staircase buttoning his cuff links. He did not look surprised. "I wanted you to hear it from me first," he said. I looked at the courier's envelope. "You sent a stranger." He gave a sad little breath, the kind he used when he wanted witnesses to think he was tired from loving me. "I tried to talk to you. But after last night, I cannot keep pretending everything is fine." I wanted to shout. I wanted to throw every printed page across the marble floor. Instead I asked, "How long have you been preparing this?" Charles adjusted his watch. "Long enough to protect both of us." Both of us meant him. It always had. By noon my debit card was declined at a gas station 5 miles from the house. By 2 the shared account disappeared from my banking app. By 4 my phone filled with messages that sounded kind but had doors hidden inside them. Margaret wrote, "I hope you get the help you need." My sister Emily wrote, "Charles called me. I am scared for you. Can you please just talk to a doctor?" A woman from the foundation wrote, "We are praying for peace and privacy during this difficult time." Privacy. That was what powerful people called silence when it protected them. I packed 2 suitcases before sunset. Clothes, toiletries, old sketchbooks, the cracked laptop, and the paint box with the flash drive taped underneath the tray of blue tubes. Charles watched from the doorway of the bedroom as if I were a guest who had overstayed. "You do not have to leave," he said. "You just have to accept help." I folded a sweater slowly. "Your help comes with a script." His expression cooled. "Be careful, Allison. Without me, people will only see the version of you they have already been warned about." That sentence followed me all the way to the small extended stay hotel near O'Hare, where the carpet smelled faintly of cleaning spray and the heater clicked every 8 minutes through the night. The room had beige walls, a microwave, and a view of the parking lot. I placed the paint box on the desk and sat in the chair without turning on the television. For the first time in years, no one was watching me, and somehow that felt both freeing and terrifying. The next few days blurred into phone calls and closed doors. 2 attorneys declined my case after hearing Charles's name. One asked if I had considered a quiet settlement. Another suggested that going against a man with that much influence could be emotionally difficult, then paused on the word emotionally as if he had already read Charles's file on me. I almost gave up in the lobby of a legal aid clinic downtown, sitting beneath fluorescent lights with my coat over my knees, and my last $20 folded inside my wallet. Then a receptionist with silver glasses looked at my intake form and said, "There is someone you should talk to." That was how I met Daniel Reed. His office was on the 6th floor of an old brick building, between a tax preparer and a dentist. No skyline view, no leather chairs, just bookshelves, a chipped coffee mug, and a framed photograph of his daughter in a soccer uniform. Daniel listened for 42 minutes without interrupting me once. He did not wince when I said Charles had told people I was unstable. He did not soften his voice in that careful way people used when they had already stopped believing me. When I finished, he tapped his pen once against his legal pad and said, "Do you have anything in writing?" I opened my purse, took out the paint box, lifted the tray, and placed the flash drive on his desk. It looked impossibly small between us. Daniel did not touch it right away. He just looked at it, then looked at me. "Allison," he said, "if this contains what you think it contains, this is no longer just a divorce." Outside his window, the elevated train roared past, shaking the glass. For the first time since the ballroom, I felt something inside me steady. Not hope exactly. Hope was too soft. This was harder than hope. This was proof. Daniel did not plug the flash drive into his main computer. He opened a locked drawer, took out an older laptop with no stickers and no saved accounts, then set it on the desk between us like a witness being sworn in. "I am going to make a copy first," he said. "Then I am going to preserve the original. From this moment on, we treat every file like it may end up in front of a judge." The words made my stomach tighten, not because I doubted him, but because part of me still expected proof to vanish the way my keys had vanished, the way appointments had changed, the way people's faces had closed when Charles told them he was worried about me. Daniel worked quietly. The screen reflected in his glasses as he opened the folder I had named Blue Paint. 1 email became 3. 3 became 12. Then 37. Some were short and cold, messages about optics, timing, and charitable board support. Others were longer, written in the smooth professional language people use when they are doing something wrong but want it to sound like strategy. Vanessa had drafted talking points for Charles in case I objected to the divorce filing. Dr. Harlan had sent a letter describing symptoms he had never treated me for. A Whitmore Holdings finance officer had written about reallocating liquid assets before domestic counsel gets involved. I sat across from Daniel with my hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold. He did not look shocked, and somehow that made it worse. Shock would have meant this was rare. His silence told me he had seen versions of this before. At last, he leaned back and exhaled through his nose. "This is strong," he said. I closed my eyes for half a second. Strong enough. Strong enough to matter. Not strong enough to be careless. He turned the laptop slightly so I could see a chain of forwarded emails, each line stacked with names, dates, and timestamps. Charles's team will argue privacy. They will argue context. They will argue you misunderstood what you saw because that is already the story they built. We need authentication. We need the original source, the metadata, and ideally server records. The room seemed to shrink. "I do not have access to his company server." "No," Daniel said. "But someone does." For the next 2 weeks, my life became quieter and more frightening at the same time. I moved through Chicago like a ghost with a library card and a prepaid phone. I read court documents in the public library downtown. I ate soup from a paper bowl in my hotel room. I painted the cracked glass woman at night from memory because I had left the original canvas at the Lake Forest house and could not risk going back. Every few days, Charles sent messages that sounded almost loving if you did not know how to hear the hook beneath them. I can still stop this from becoming public. I want you safe. Please do not let strangers use you. Each time Daniel told me not to answer. He is not writing to you, he said. He is writing for the exhibit list. Then, 5 days before the hearing, Charles's attorney filed a motion to exclude the emails. The language was brutal in its politeness. They claimed I had accessed confidential corporate communications during a period of emotional distress. They claimed the files were incomplete, unreliable, and potentially manipulated. They even included a note from Dr. Harlan stating that stress could affect my memory and perception. I read the motion twice in Daniel's office, and my vision blurred at the edges. They are doing it again, I whispered. They are using the accusation to bury the evidence. Daniel took the papers from my hand before I could crease them. They are trying, he said. There is a difference. That evening, as sleet tapped against the window of my hotel room, I received a call from a blocked number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. A man's voice said, "Mrs. Whitmore, my name is Owen Keller. I used to work information technology at Whitmore Holdings." I sat up slowly. "How did you get this number?" "Your attorney left a message with an old colleague of mine." "I should have called sooner." He paused and I heard traffic behind him, maybe from a gas station, maybe from a parking lot. I was fired in January after refusing to delete archived mail from the executive server. At the time, I thought it was about compliance cleanup. After I saw the filing in the news, I understood what they wanted gone. My hand tightened around the phone. "Do those emails still exist?" Owen was quiet for one breath, then another. "Yes," he said. "And the originals say exactly who sent them." The heater clicked on beneath the window, blowing warm air into the room, but I still felt cold. Not the cold of fear this time. The cold of standing at the edge of something enormous. By morning, Daniel had arranged to meet Owen in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse. Owen arrived in a brown coat with a backpack held against his chest and the nervous posture of a man who had already paid for telling the truth. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. Inside were printed logs, a sworn statement, and a secure drive containing server metadata. Daniel reviewed the first page, then looked at me. His tired eyes had changed. "Allison," he said quietly, "now we have the receipts they cannot call imagination." The sealed envelope from Owen Keller changed the air around us, but it did not make the fear disappear. If anything, it made everything sharper. The next morning, Daniel filed his response with the court, and for the first time, Charles's side stopped sounding politely concerned and started sounding angry beneath the legal language. They demanded sanctions. They questioned Owen's credibility. They claimed the server logs were taken by a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. They filed 3 motions in one afternoon, each one more urgent than the last, as if paper could outrun the truth. Daniel read them at his desk without blinking. "They are not trying to win this motion anymore," he said. "They are trying to scare you before the hearing." I wanted to say it would not work. I wanted to be the kind of woman who straightened her shoulders and spoke like courage had no cost. But that night, alone in my hotel room near O'Hare, with sleet turning the parking lot lights into blurry halos, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at Charles's latest message on my prepaid phone. "Allison, this has gone far enough. Take the settlement. Admit you have been under medical stress. You will receive enough money to live comfortably, and no one has to know how bad this became." I read it once, then again. The words were smooth, almost merciful, but I could feel the door closing behind each sentence. Attached was a settlement agreement drafted in careful language. In exchange for financial support, I would acknowledge emotional instability, withdraw objections to the asset restrictions, surrender all copied communications, and agree never to discuss private marital matters in public. There it was, a beautiful cage lined with money. For a few minutes, I let myself imagine signing it. A small apartment somewhere quiet. No reporters. No courtroom. No Margaret looking at me like I had broken something precious. No Vanessa pretending pity while she sharpened another lie. I could disappear and people might forget. But then I thought of the woman in my painting standing behind the cracked glass. I thought of my old students at the hospital, dipping brushes into washable paint, trusting me when I told them mistakes could become part of the picture. I thought of every morning I had searched for missing keys, every time Charles told me I remembered wrong, every dinner where I sat across from people who believed his concern before they heard my words. If I signed, he would not just keep the house, the money, or the story. He would keep my memory. He would own the official version of my mind. My phone buzzed again. This time, the message came from an unknown number. You should listen to him. Trials are hard on fragile women. I did not need a signature to know Vanessa had sent it. My hands shook, but not from confusion. From recognition. I took screenshots of both messages, forwarded them to Daniel, and placed the phone face down on the desk. Then I opened my cracked laptop, the one with the missing letter A. And for the first time in weeks, I signed into my old cloud backup. I was looking for photographs of the painting, something to remind myself that I had existed before Charles's version of me. Instead, a notification appeared in the corner of the screen. Sync complete. 32 archived items restored. I froze. The old laptop had been offline for days after I left Lake Forest, and now, connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, it was pulling files from an automatic backup I had forgotten existed. One folder appeared with the same plain label I had used months earlier. Blue paint. My pulse jumped. I opened it. More screenshots loaded first. Then a file I did not remember saving. Then another email chain, not from the night I found the inbox, but from weeks earlier, when Charles must have used my laptop during one of those careless moments he thought did not matter. This thread had attachments. Draft statements. A proposed letter for Dr. Harlan. A timeline Vanessa had created titled Allison Public Concern Strategy. And at the bottom, one reply from Charles himself, sent at 1:17 in the morning, written with the arrogance of a man certain he would never be read by the person he was destroying. If she looks unstable, no one will believe anything else. I sat back so fast the chair wheels bumped the wall. For a moment, the hotel room was completely silent except for the heater clicking under the window. Then I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because the truth had just walked back into the room carrying its own lantern. I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough with sleep. Allison. There is more, I said. Not copied from his server. Synced from my own backup. His words, his account, his timestamp. Daniel was silent for one breath. Then I heard papers shifting, a pen clicking, the sound of a man becoming fully awake. Do not touch another file, he said. Photograph the screen with your phone, then close the laptop. I will be there in 20 minutes. When he arrived, his hair was damp from the freezing rain, and his coat was buttoned wrong. He reviewed the restored files at the tiny hotel desk, while I stood by the window watching cars move along the frontage road. Finally, he leaned back, and the look on his face was not excitement. It was focus. Tomorrow, he said, they are going to tell the judge you imagined a pattern. He turned the laptop toward me, the email glowing in the dim room like a match struck in the dark. And then we are going to show the court the pattern was his plan. The next morning, courtroom 4B felt smaller than it had before, though nothing had changed except what I carried into it. The same wooden benches. The same brass clock above the door. The same low murmur of people pretending not to watch me. Charles sat at the opposite table with his hands folded, calm again, his face arranged into that familiar expression of patient sorrow. Vanessa sat behind him in a pale coat, her legs crossed at the ankles, one hand resting on her phone. Margaret was there too, wearing pearls and a navy dress, her eyes red as if she had already mourned the version of the family Charles told her she was losing. When I sat beside Daniel, he placed one folder on the table and nothing else. No dramatic stack of papers. No performance. Just one folder, one laptop, and the quiet confidence of a man who knew the weight of what was inside. Charles's attorney rose first. His name was Mr. Caldwell, and he had a voice polished smooth by years of turning complicated things into simple ones for rich clients. He spoke about concern. He spoke about privacy. He spoke about my emotional state with such careful sympathy that anyone listening might have thought he was protecting me instead of helping erase me. Mrs. Whitmore has struggled under significant stress, he said, turning slightly toward the judge. The petitioner has made every effort to handle this matter with dignity, but these so-called emails are unreliable, improperly obtained, and part of a broader pattern of confusion. Confusion. The word landed exactly where he aimed it. I felt people behind me shift. Someone coughed. Charles lowered his eyes. The performance was working just as it had worked in dining rooms, doctors' offices, and ballrooms. Then Daniel stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not rush. Your Honor, opposing counsel is asking this court to exclude communications by claiming my client misunderstood them. We are prepared to show that she did not misunderstand anything. Mr. Caldwell objected before Daniel finished the sentence. Daniel expected it. He handed the clerk a copy of Owen Keller's sworn statement, the server metadata, and the restored backup records from my laptop. The judge adjusted her glasses. The room quieted in a different way then, not pity, not gossip, but attention. Daniel called Owen first. Owen walked to the stand in the same brown coat I had seen at the coffee shop, his hair combed, his hands clasped tightly until the clerk asked him to raise one. He explained the executive server, the archived emails, the deletion request, and why he refused to remove records tied to pending legal matters. Mr. Caldwell tried to make him sound bitter. Owen simply answered, I was fired, yes. But the records were created before I was fired. The timestamps do not care about my employment status. A few people looked up at that. Then Daniel connected his laptop to the courtroom screen. My heart began to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. The first email appeared large and clear against the white wall. Vanessa to Charles. Subject: Allison Public Concern Strategy. Daniel read only the necessary lines. Board members should be reminded of her recent instability before the filing becomes public. Margaret's hand moved to her pearls. Charles did not move. The second email appeared. Dr. Harlan's draft letter. Daniel highlighted the attached comments showing edits from Vanessa and approval from Charles's account. The judge leaned forward. The third email appeared. A finance message about reallocating liquid assets before domestic counsel gets involved. Mr. Caldwell stood again, but his voice had lost some of its polish. Context is missing, Your Honor. Daniel clicked once. The full thread opened. Context filled the screen like daylight entering a locked room. Names, dates, replies, attachments, timestamps. Then came the final email, the one restored from my own forgotten backup, the sentence Charles had written when he thought the world belonged to him because it always had. If she looks unstable, no one will believe anything else. Nobody spoke. Not the judge. Not the attorneys. Not the reporters in the back row. The silence was so complete I could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Charles's face changed slowly, not into guilt, not exactly, but into calculation that had suddenly run out of numbers. Vanessa looked down at her phone, but there was nowhere left for her eyes to hide. Margaret stared at the screen as if she had never seen her son's name before. Daniel turned toward Charles's table. The truth does not need to scream, Mr. Whitmore, he said, his voice steady enough to cut glass. It only needs to be documented. For the first time in 3 years, I looked across a room full of people and did not see doubt reflected back at me. I saw recognition. I saw discomfort. I saw the story Charles had built begin to collapse under the weight of his own words. And when the judge finally spoke, ordering the emails admitted for review and freezing any further asset transfers until a full investigation could be completed, I did not feel victory rush through me. I felt air. Clean, ordinary air, filling my lungs as if I had been underwater for years and had only just reached the surface. The judge did not end Charles Whitmore's world that morning, but she ended his control over mine. She ordered a full review of the financial transfers, denied his request to restrict my access to marital assets, and instructed both parties to preserve every communication tied to the case. Her voice stayed calm, almost ordinary, but each sentence loosened something that had been wrapped around my life for years. Charles sat perfectly still while she spoke, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the polished table in front of him. Mr. Caldwell kept writing notes he no longer seemed eager to read. Vanessa left the courtroom before the hearing was fully over, her pale coat moving quickly between the benches like a flag being taken down. Margaret remained seated, one hand over her mouth, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. When the judge called a recess, the room came alive all at once. Reporters stood. Phones lit up. People whispered my name differently now, not with pity, not with suspicion, but with the awkwardness of those who had joined a lie because it was easier than asking questions. Charles finally turned toward me. For a moment I saw the old performance try to return to his face, the wounded husband, the reasonable man, the one who could still explain everything if given a quieter room. But there was no quieter room left. There was a public record. There were timestamps. There were emails. Daniel touched my elbow gently. We should go. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was crowded, but I did not feel trapped anymore. A reporter asked what I wanted to say. Another asked whether I felt vindicated. I looked past them toward the tall courthouse windows, where morning light had broken through the clouds and spilled across the marble floor in bright rectangles. I just want to go home, I said, then realized I did not mean the Lake Forest house. I never went back there to live. A court officer supervised the pickup of my belongings 2 weeks later. The cracked glass painting was still in the studio, leaning against the wall where I had left it, half-finished and dusty along the frame. For a while I only stood in front of it. The woman behind the glass looked tired, yes, but not defeated. I wrapped the canvas in a moving blanket and carried it out myself. The divorce took months. The financial investigation took longer. Dr. Harlan lost his position with the private practice. Vanessa resigned from Whitmore Holdings before the board could vote. Charles stepped down from the foundation, then from 2 advisory boards, then from the version of public life that had once applauded him without looking too closely. I learned not to build my healing around his consequences. Some days that was difficult. There were mornings when I woke in my new apartment and still checked my memory like a locked door. Did I place the keys on the counter? Did I send that email? Did I agree to that appointment? Then I would pause, breathe, and answer myself with patience. Yes, Allison. You remember. 6 months after the hearing, I rented a small studio in Evanston above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon by 7 in the morning. The floors were uneven. The windows rattled in the wind off Lake Michigan, and the heating bill was terrible. I loved every inch of it. I finished the cracked glass painting there on a rainy Sunday afternoon. I kept the woman, the lifted hand, the fractured pane, but I changed the ending. I painted the glass breaking outward, not sharply, not violently, just opening piece by piece, until warm light came through the cracks and touched her face. I called it The Morning I Was Believed. A year later, that painting hung on the back wall during the first workshop I ever hosted for women rebuilding their lives after being doubted, controlled, or quietly erased. There were 12 of us in folding chairs, drinking coffee from paper cups, surrounded by blank canvases and nervous laughter. I did not tell them healing was simple. I did not tell them truth fixes everything overnight. I told them what I knew. The worst thing he stole from me was not money, I said, looking at the painting, then at the women who had come to remember themselves. It was my trust in my own mind. And that is what I came here to take back. Outside, the bakery bell rang downstairs. Somewhere below us, someone opened a door, and the smell of fresh bread rose through the floorboards. I picked up a brush, dipped it into blue paint, and for the first time in a very long time my hand did not shake.